If you look at a curve of the electrical energy demand in the United States versus time, it goes up in almost an exponential fashion through the 60s. People have to plan. Oh my God, we need to start building power plants. Coal power plants, gas power plants, oil power plants, nuclear power plants. Huge ramp up. In 1972-3, with the Arab oil embargo, and then 1979, the Iranian Revolution, oil prices shot up dramatically, energy use plummeted, or at least its growth plummeted, and the country went flat. Many new power plants that had been under planning or even under construction, whether they be coal power plants or nuclear power plants, stopped because the need for them did not appear to be there. Also during this time, after 3 Mile Island, there was a thought that something, remember, no one was hurt, but the investors were hurt. So there has to be a plan to say we may have to make sure the safety systems all work better. The environmental movement was really active and important in that time. The Clean Air Act, the first one ever, 1970. Many environmental thoughts of protecting endangered species. The birth of the Environmental Protection Agency occurred in this decade. And with that came even more regulation. Now let's couple double-digit interest rates of the 80s. And you can see that construction of large, complicated projects that had both a safety aspect and had an environmental aspect would be very, very difficult to build. In fact, the licensing procedure went something like this. The first thing you needed was a construction permit. Now, this is not unusual. Everything needs a construction permit, right? If you build an addition on your house, you need a construction permit. And the people who decide this would be the local government. Did you follow zoning? Let's say you're trying to build a power plant. You can't build it in the middle of the city or a suburb. It has to be zoned. It has to be someplace they plan to have large industrial things like a power plant. And it doesn't matter if it's nuclear, coal, or anything else. And this takes about 1/2 of a year. Okay? So this is time up here, say years. Great. That's wonderful. But back in this time frame, 80s, if you now wanted to build a power plant, well, that's going to have an environmental impact. So you now have to write an environmental impact statement. And this environmental impact statement can't just be done for one site, because as was learned, there's always an environmental impact. You're building something enormous, something worth billions of dollars that will take up many, many acres of land. Yes, it will have an environmental impact. So the law says, don't just do this once. Do this for 2 sites. We want to see by comparison. Who decides whether this is good enough? The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. And if it's a nuclear power plant, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC, gets involved as well. This process is time-consuming, and it's going to take between 1.5 to 2 years. If this was a coal power plant, you're now good to go. It's a natural gas power plant. You're now good to go. Start building it. Start operating it as soon as you got it built. If you were a nuclear power plant, another law came up. You needed to write a preliminary safety analysis report. Here, you can see in this demo one of the volumes of it, of the many volumes in this report, detailing how, if I build this nuclear reactor, it's going to operate safely. These will be all my safety systems. These are where all my plans are. A complete plan for this. And not only did you have to have a complete plan, but this needed to go before a new board, the Atomic Safety Licensing Board. A board made up, yes, of some nuclear experts, but also of some politicians that were appointed, some people appointed by politicians and lawyers, and it would go before an Atomic Safety Licensing Board. And the Atomic Safety Licensing Board would hold public hearings. And members from the public could come and say, hey, you know that thing on page 852 of volume 3? I don't think they quite have that right. You better check into that. This is a long process of back and forth. In fact, this whole process took 1 to 2 years. If you managed to get a yes, you could actually start construction. Hey, you can dig a hole in the ground. And, of course, you're building a power plant, a nuclear power plant, probably at best, and France can do it in this time, it'll take you 4 years to build it. Should mention that during this time, there is an appeals process for these public hearings. If someone doesn't like what they heard, they will appeal. And once they appeal, this goes to the Atomic Safety Licensing Appeal Board. Okay. If they win their appeal, of course, your construction stops. You have to fix that problem before you can continue. Good. We got the power plant built. Coal power plant, gas power plant probably done by now. Nuclear power plant, can we turn it on? No. That was the preliminary safety analysis report. Now you need to write the safety analysis report. Another huge, multi-volume and detailed plan that tells all the things that you actually built and actually tells if all of these things are now going to work. It's done. It's sitting there. You've paid all your money. You borrowed your money. You're paying interest. This goes to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. This goes to the Atomic Safety Licensing Board. Oh, and by the way, they now have another round of public hearings. Involving the public is always a good thing. After all, this could impact the people's lives. It also became a vehicle for interest groups that were trying to stop nuclear power. Because you see, this is a very critical stage. Your power plant's built. Your $4, $5, $6 billion has been spent. You're paying interest payments on that. You're not allowed to put it into your rate structure yet. Can't do that until it's operating. Here is where power companies could be driven out of business with a virtually finished reactor that does not have an operating license. This process is another 1 to 2 year process. So, if you finally pass, you get to operate at low power. At least you can now start charging for it, because the public hearings, once again, have an appeal, and the appeal board, Atomic Safety Licensing Appeal Board, has to meet and give the final okay so you can go to full power. And this process, if we just add it up, 4, 5, 6, could take, on average, between 8 and 10 years. France does it in 4. And you might say, well, what's the difference? Why can't France do it? Well, the first is there's one power company in France, the French government. In the U.S., there are hundreds, literally hundreds, if not maybe thousands of power companies. It's each an individual unit, a local thing. I have Eastern Illini Electric, cooperative power company. And of the 100 reactors that are built in the United States, every one of them is unique. Not if they built 2 at the same place, but every site is unique. And you had people building it almost all the time for the first time. In France, standardized design. Yes, if there are improvements, clearly they make them to the next one. The people who work building the plant, as soon as they're done building one, they can go on and build another one. Yes, it's somewhere else in the country, but all of France is relatively small. Maybe not all the workers will go and move on the next, but the core will. The ones that have experience, the ones that have training, maybe they get promoted. In the US, when you finish building one reactor, everyone's fired, right? Unless, of course, you want to move from Texas to New York or something, wherever the next reactor happens to be going in. So the type of system that standardizes a design, the type of system that standardizes the people working on it, the parts that build the critical components built by one entity, that is something that's much more sensible. This type of process, coupled with high interest rates, coupled with an uncertainty in the amount of time, and coupled with unique designs, which means it's going to cost a lot, doomed nuclear power expansion, especially considering that the country's energy appetite had leveled off. Well, we come into the years 2000, and it's clear that while our total amount of energy use is fairly constant, that the growth of electricity as the share of our energy use is definitely increasing. Then we also couple with this with the fact that our number of reactors in the United States, which are represented here by all these different colors, 99 operating plants as of filming this in 2015, are getting old. The green ones on here have already had their licenses renewed. The original licenses were for 40 years. Okay? The ones that are in red are probably coming up for renewal, which means that all of these plants, in some period of time, 10, 15 years, certainly by 20 years, will have reached their end of lifetime. These plants represent 20% of the electricity in the United States. It's going to be a problem. So people started building more power plants. And the key in building more power plants was to have some simpler process than this. Congress recognized this, government recognized this, nuclear power industry recognized this. Even groups like the Sierra Club, which came out in favor, at least the founder of it did, of nuclear power, recognized this. And fortunately, it was not a partisan issue. Democrats and Republicans worked together to say, you know, we have to be able to do this better. And the current scheme that has existed for a while and is in practice today is this one. So what is this scheme? Well, this scheme is doing both the environmental impact and the safety planning in parallel. You see, in this old scheme here, after this final safety analysis report and the operation, there was even another report, a final report that had to be written. All of these things adding tremendous amounts of time. Here, in the new scheme, there's only one public hearing. After we have the environment, after we have the safety, still want to involve the public, but do it in a much more sensible way. And it allows you to condense this 8 to 10 years to something much more reasonable, hopefully a 5-year cycle. Maybe it'll be 6. We do have an actual trial run. I wouldn't say trial, an actual reactor that has gone through this new system. It was one that had been started during this old system. Tennessee Valley Authority, Wilkes-Barre Power Plant number 2. They had an operating power plant, and they were all set to build a second one. And they got caught up in this 1980s tangle of costing way too much and taking way too much time. They still had the spot for it, still had the design, some improvements. Over the last 5 years, they have built it, and it is set to come online near the end of 2015. This is the new wave of licensing, which now has cleared the hurdle to be able to build new plants. They could still be a very similar design, or, as you'll learn next, they could be of an even superior design. No longer generation 2, but generation 3. That's what you need to know about atomic power plant licensing.